stern and firm condemnation of the unilateral military action taken by the United States in the territory of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. We also reiterate consistently our firm commitment to respect for international law, sovereignty and territorial integrity of states, and the peaceful settlement of disputes, the prohibition of the threat or the use of the threat of force, and full respect for human rights. These affirmations are accepted by the majority, and they must maintain their importance in order to preserve international peace and security. We said this on the 23rd of December when we took the floor, and we reiterate this today. Chile does not recognize the Maduro regime, but serious violations of human rights being faced by Venezuela do not have a military solution. They can only be addressed through peaceful, gradual and inclusive measures that will take into account the legitimate aspirations of the Venezuelan people. Respect for international law does not allow for exceptions, including when it comes to addressing the illegitimacy of a president. Problems must always be solved within the normative framework that we have provided for ourselves as nations. The future of Venezuela must include free elections, citizen participation, and international assistance, and not with actions that could create dangerous precedents or escalate tensions in the region with serious consequences for the population. Chile, as a witness of history and based on our own experience with the loss of democracy, where there was foreign interference that caused extreme damage and pain for the Chilean people. We were able to recover our democracy through a transitional process that was carried out with the assistance of the international community, the strength of organized citizens, and through our institutions. Mr. President, Chile would like also to underscore the urgent need to continue with coordinated efforts multilaterally to address transnational organized crime, and we're also convinced that Latin America and the Caribbean must continue to be a zone of peace, because that zone of peace not only serves Latin America and the Caribbean, but the entire world. An armed conflict will have devastating humanitarian consequences in Venezuela and in the region. It will worsen the suffering of the civilian population and worsen even further the displacement, insecurity and vulnerability aspects of the situation. We reiterate that any differences must be dealt with exclusively through peaceful means in strict respect for international law, the sovereignty of states, and the prohibition of the use or the threat of the use of force. As was recently indicated by the heads of state of Brazil, Chile, Mexico, Uruguay, and Spain, we express our concern with regard to any attempt to control government administration or foreign ownership of strategic assets. This would be against international law and would threaten the political, economic, and social stability of the region. Mr. President, given this complex scenario, Chile welcomes the role that could be played by multilateral fora, and here particularly we would refer to the role of the United Nations, and particularly the role that could be played by the Secretary General and by this Council, with the consent of the parties involved to contribute to de-escalating the situation and searching for an understanding that would favor a peaceful and lasting exit to the crisis. Prudent leadership and experience of our organization, as well as the regional organizations and mechanisms, could be very relevant to avoid a further worsening of the situation and to keep open the channels of communication. Chile reiterates its preparedness to support constructive initiatives that will point in this direction and work together with countries of the region and with the international community for stability and mutual understanding and respect for the principles that underpin this organization. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Chile for the statement and now give the floor to the representatives of Brazil.
Mr. President, We'd like to thank Somalia for convening this emergency session of the Security Council. Brazil categorically and firmly rejects the armed intervention in Venezuelan territory in flagrant violation of the Charter of the United Nations and of international law. The bombings on Venezuelan territory and the capture of its president cross an unacceptable line. These acts constitute a very serious affront to the sovereignty of Venezuela and set an extremely dangerous precedent for the entire international community. The Charter of the United Nations establishes as a pillar of the international order the prohibition of the use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state, except in the circumstances strictly provided for therein. The acceptance of actions of this nature would inexorably lead to a scenario marked by violence, disorder, and the erosion of multilateralism, to the detriment of international law and institutions. The effects of the weakening of international governance and cooperation mechanisms are already evident. The record number since the Second World War of 61 active armed conflicts, the unprecedented figure of 117 million people in situations of humanitarian disaster around the world, reflecting the increase in wars, displacement, and crimes against humanity, such as the genocide in Gaza, and the global increase in military spending, which is approaching the historical mark of $2.7 trillion. As Brazil has reiterated on numerous occasions, the norms that govern coexistence among states are mandatory and universal. They do not admit exceptions based on ideological, geopolitical, political, economic, or any other kind of interests or projects. They do not admit that the exploitation of natural or economic resources justifies the use of force or the illegal change of a government. The multipolar world of the 21st century, which promotes peace and prosperity, must not be confused with spheres of influence. We cannot accept the argument that the end justifies the means. This reasoning lacks legitimacy and opens the possibility of granting the strongest the right to define what is just or unjust, what is right or wrong, and even to ignore national sovereignties, imposing the decisions to be taken by the weakest. Latin America and the Caribbean have made peace a conscious, lasting, and irreversible choice. The resort to force in our region evokes chapters of history that we believed we'd left behind us and endangers the collective effort to preserve the region as a zone of peace and cooperation, free of armed conflicts, respectful of international law and the principle of non-intervention. Armed interventions in the past have had profoundly negative and lasting consequences. Contrary to freedom and democracy, those interventions produced authoritarian regimes and serious violations of human rights, leaving as a lamentable result thousands of dead, political prisoners, tortured persons, and disappeared persons whose families still today search for their loved ones, as well as justice and reparation. For the first time in South America, a profoundly alarming event has occurred. An external armed aggression with the deployment of troops and bombings in a neighboring country contiguous with Brazil, with which we share more than 2,000 kilometers of border. Mr. President, South America is a zone of peace. I insist upon that. We have upheld and will uphold with full determination peace and non-intervention in our region. Furthermore, Brazil does not believe that the solution to the situation in Venezuela lies in the creation of protectorates in the country, but rather in solutions that respect the self-determination of the Venezuelan people within the framework of its constitution. The events of January 3rd transcend the regional sphere. The attack on the sovereignty of any country, regardless of the direction of its government, affects the entire international community. This and other cases of armed intervention against the sovereignty of a country, its territorial integrity, or its institutions must be vehemently condemned. It is up to this Council to assume its responsibility and react with determination, clarity, and obedience to international law in order to prevent the law of force from prevailing over the force of law. Brazil trusts that the future of Venezuela will be built by the Venezuelan people through dialogue, without external interference, and within the framework of international law. Thank you.
For Brazil, for the statement, and now give the floor to the representative of Mexico.
Señor Presidente.
Mr. President, thank you for having convened this emergency